Hi everyone, I'm George. I'm a Senior Solutions Architect at AWS, working in UK and Ireland territories. I'm also a member of the Travel and Hospitality Technical Field Community and the Migration and Modernization Technical Field Community. But today, I'm representing Amazon Emotional Intelligence and Success Community. Last year and a half was unprecedented for a generation. We were asked not to go out, city streets became deserted, and the economic future became uncertain. We were flooded with the flow of negative news, and we thought the world was going out of toilet paper. Looking back, I think, why did I buy all of that? But we also suffered from physical isolation. We worried about the elder and our health of the grandparents, and we worried about the loved ones, especially the ones most sensitive with health issues. We've discovered this thing, the work from home, which actually translated into having young and bored kids running around what we now call home office. Well, in 2020, the Office Group sponsored a burnout study that surveyed 2,000 UK adults between August and September. They questioned about the main causes of burnout. 6 out of 10 people mentioned working longer hours. 4 out of 10 people mentioned not being able to separate the work life from the personal life. But overall, 3 out of 10 people mentioned that lockdown brought them closer to the burnout or to a burnout. So please give me a thumbs up or a +1 if you share any of these previous opinions. Thank you. To keep our sanity, we resorted to online social gatherings, although this photo is probably not a good example of mental sanity. I would love to say for myself that I handled very well emotionally, but that's not true. The truth is, I had a burnout in August 2020 during the pandemic. I felt really bad at the time, but it was an eye-opener. At hindsight, it was probably the best stepping stone to a happier life. It motivated me to study hard about my emotions, and it also helped me to be more emotionally honest and resilient. It turned me into a better person, although at least that's my fiance's opinion, and I don't know if that counts. Today, I will share with you the learnings of this journey, but let me start the story from the very beginning. In January 2020, I went to the AWS kickoff in Chicago, where I had the pleasure to watch a talk by Rich Hua on emotional intelligence, or EQ. And this is the ability to detect, understand, and manage emotions. This talk was the single most attended session on the sales kickoff, with close to 1,000 attendees. And it was the second most rated session of all the entire kickoff, and these were 790 sessions. On the following month, I met Rich in London, and I helped them organize a replay. And on the back of that, I joined the EQ&S group, or Emotional Intelligence and Success group. Since then, the group has delivered emotional intelligence talks to over 80,000 Amazonians. But it wasn't until I had the burnout back in August that I actually stopped to read Daniel Goleman's Emotional Intelligence group. The book explains that our brain is divided in two systems, the emotional and the analytical. Science called the first one the limbic system, or system 1, and they call the second one the prefrontal cortex, or neocortex, or just system 2. The first one, the emotional, is the core and oldest part of our brain from an evolution perspective. It seeks safety, security, and control. It has two components that govern our emotional reaction. These are the thalamus and the amygdala. The thalamus receives the emotional stimulus, while the amygdala reacts emotionally to those stimulus. In conjunction, they detect threats and they decide if we should freeze, fight, or flight. But humans have evolved, and now this System 2, which is the analytical outer brain, oversees this dialogue. It intercepts the communications between the thalamus and the amygdala and adds self-control, judgment, and compassion to emotional decisions. This is another way to describe the flow. As you can see here, the analytical System 2 intercepts the emotional communications between the components of the System 1. Now the issue is, there's still a direct pathway between the thalamus and the amygdala in the emotional System 1. And this pathway is actually faster than the indirect path via the analytical System 2. As a consequence, we have slower analytical responses. For example, when you think to yourself, "What have I done?" or "Why did I say that?" That is known as emotional hijacking. Furthermore, if the emotional System 1 detects danger or a crisis, or even an everyday emergency, it may completely override the analytical System 2. In other words, when we lose control of our agenda, our calendar, our work log, we go from smart to stupid. When we fail to manage how we react emotionally to other people's behaviors, we go from smart to stupid. And when we fail to provide a safe environment for our teams and our co-workers, well, you guessed it, they go from smart to stupid. I found the whole concept mind-blowing and decided to read more. My first stop was Influence by Robert Cialdini. He talks about our conditioned or hardwired behaviors. For example, do you know that canned laughter when you're watching a comedy or TV show? That laughter actually makes us laugh. That's why they keep it. Or those marketing campaigns that they always tend to make us buy what we don't need? Well, there you go. He talks about these behaviors as being responsible for the success of humans. However, nowadays, they mostly make us stockpile toilet paper. Some of these behaviors are social proof. We follow crowds and actions of others. Reciprocity. We tend to return favors and pay back our debts. Likability. We empathize and comply with people we like. My second stop was Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. He mentions the impact of emotions on financial decisions. And on the back of that work, he actually won the Nobel Prize for Economics. He says that System 1 is a fast, emotional, and intuitive system, while System 2, the analytical, is a slow system. He also says that we spend most of our time on emotional System 1 instead of the analytical System 2. In conclusion, we tend to be less rational than we really think we are. He also mentions that emotional System 1 jumps into conclusions, which is called the confirmation bias. He says that the emotional System 1 is insensitive to quality and quantity of the data. And that's probably why at Amazon we use anecdotes with data points. As a general advice, Daniel asks people to work to disconfirm our beliefs, which is really similar, if you think about it, to the leadership principle, are right a lot. The third book I looked at was The Chimp Paradox by Professor Steve Peters. He nicknamed the emotional System 1 as chimp and the analytical System 2 as the human. He invites us to observe our state of mind constantly and constantly ask ourselves, who is in charge here, right now? Is it the human or is it the chimp? And ask ourselves as well, do you really want to feel and act this way? Or is this your chimp taking over? It's interesting that this book was based on real-life case studies that resulted from a mind management program. So it has a set of mindful and meditation actionable techniques that you can use. Quite interesting. It also teaches how to tame that inner chimp and have better relations with others, but also with ourselves. With this understanding of the emotional hijacking and my conditioned behavior, I then stopped and asked myself, well, who am I? The chimp paradox has a nice explanation. It says, we are who we aspire to be. That's good. I like that. But how do I know when I get there? I mean, how do I even know if I'm on the right path? Well, I decided to break my emotional journey into 4 objectives to allow me to recognize, understand, and manage my own emotions, and then recognize, understand, and influence the emotions of others. My first self-awareness book was Insight by Tasha Erich. She talks about internal self-awareness, which is how we see ourselves, and external self-awareness, how others see us. My learnings from this book were how to clarify my values, my passions, my aspirations, and also how to request and listen to feedback. The next book I looked at was 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. He teaches how to establish core values and set priorities and also manage workload. But what I really found interesting is how he mentions directly Amazon leadership principles in culture. He directly talks about bias for action, learn and be curious, and working backwards, which is part of our customer obsession leadership principle. Very interesting. But now that I understood how and why I let my emotions control my behavior, and I also understood how that affected the people around me, including the ones I loved, I felt ashamed. I felt shame of myself. So I went back to Rich's teaching on emotional intelligence, where Rich speaks about the concept of being buoyant. And Rich shows this happy bear floating on calm and rough waters. And I thought, well, that's it. That's exactly what I need. Where do I buy it? Well, I looked at Amazon.com, of course. It's a store of everything, right? And bang, I found it. It was in this book called To Sell is Human by Daniel Pink. Daniel explains the definition of selling, putting it closer to influencing. He gives a few examples. For example, parents sell tasteless veggies to children. Teachers sell boring math to teenagers. The book itself is a simple yet powerful guide to stay afloat, with self-compassion, teaching us how to be positive and give ourselves a break, and also to treat ourselves as we would treat a good friend. My second stop was Joy on Demand by Chade Meng Tan, which talks about the art of discovering the happiness within. He teaches how to turn a mindful breath practice into a habit, and I picked that up and I actually now use it to clear my thoughts, to focus on meetings, for example, and also to shut down those inner voices to be able to fall asleep more quickly. The book also has 3 techniques which I found interesting and I actually used. So these techniques are to find happiness on everyday miracles. 1. Note 3 gratitudes every day. Give it a try for 3 weeks. See how it goes. The other one is send an accolade per day. Say thank you for someone, but also mention what was the impact that person had on your life. Finally, collect and treasure those accolades that you receive. They will keep you afloat on those rainy days. The third book I looked at is Daring Greatly by Brené Brown. On that book, I learned how to embrace vulnerability. And that basically translates into having the courage to be imperfect. Also learned about shame resiliency. That translates into authenticity. The authenticity of being ourselves. Then connection. Making friends at work. If you make friends at work, you get that sense of belonging. Remember the chimp back there? The emotional part of wanting to feel safe? Well, we want to feel safe, we want to belong to somewhere. Finally, this book was the reason why I'm actually telling my story today. These 3 books definitely boosted my self-esteem. But this was not sustainable on the long run because it was still me, and me. And the truth is, it is hard to understand other people. So I came across this concept of alexithymia, which is the inability to identify and describe the emotions experienced by ourselves and others. It actually occurs to about 1 person in every 10 people in the general population. It also affects half of the people with autism, including Asperger. But it's not an overlap, or actually it is an overlap. It is not a consequence of. Today, identifying and describing emotions of ourselves and others, it's no more a cultural stigma like in the past. And it's actually part of many school programs, which is quite fantastic. So I decided to assume that I have some lack of natural skills, but if I had learned to identify my own feelings already, maybe I could learn to identify and describe the feelings of others. So I started with How to Win Friends and Influence People from Dale Carnegie. He talks about being genuine empathy. Sorry about my English. And he talks about how to become genuinely interested in other people and how to try honestly to see from the other person's point of view. With this book, I learned some interesting listening skills. For example, how to encourage others to talk about them and how to show respect for the other person's opinion, which is really similar, if you think about it, with diversity, inclusion, and equality. The second book about it was Never Split the Difference from Chris Voss and Tal Raz. And they talk about, they mention that all negotiations involve emotions and illogical reactions. The book teaches how to be empathetic about how the other person is feeling. And they describe empathy not as an agreement. You don't need to be in agreement with the other person. You just need to see the other person's perspective and adjust your message. They also say that listening is not a passive activity. It's actually the most active thing you can do, well, at least in their perspective. They finally mention that everyone's emotional needs include safety, security, and control. And by this point, I already knew why. The third and last book about it was The Charisma Myth by Olivia Fox-Cabane. She says that charisma, it is not an inborn talent, although some people can be born with it. But this is a skill that we can learn and practice. And she mentions 3 key components of charisma: presence, power, and warmth. Presence, it has to do with the way that we pay full attention, the way of paying full attention to what's happening around us. Power is the perceived ability to impact, for example, our expertise or our status or even our health, the way we look. This is important. Finally, warmth. Warmth is the perceived goodwill to actually use that power, and it has much to do with body language. But what I really found fantastic on this book was the visualization techniques. So the system 1 is faster than the system 2. That means we can kind of distort reality. She gives these examples. For example, picture success. If you're in front of an audience or in front of customers, picture them with angel wings. Or you can picture yourself receiving a 20-second hug from your loved ones. Because your system 1, the emotional one, is faster than system 2, the analytical, you will get the benefits of those emotional stimulus by thinking about these things before system 2 recognizes that that is not real, but you still have the benefits still. So quite interesting. And that was my emotional intelligence library journey. From discovering the emotional system 1 and the analytical system 2, or the limbic system and the neocortex, through accepting system 1's emotional hijack and learn how to manage it, and closing with Olivia Fox's brilliant use of system 1's emotional hijack to distort reality in our favor, and with that increase our charisma. However, I appreciate that 12 books might be overwhelming, so I have 2 solutions for that. The first one is to focus only on the bottom row, which are my preferences. The second solution is invite you to join the Emotional Intelligence community. You can subscribe to our newsletter with over 6,000 readers so far, or join our Slack community with 3,000 members and growing, or you can navigate to our wiki. There you will find videos, classes, and tools about emotional intelligence. And finally, reach out. Don't be a stranger. Thank you for this session.